I don't know what the developers were smoking when they made Mexican Ninja, because Mexican Ninja is a 2.5D roguelike beat-em-up where you fight your way through Nuevo Tokyo, beating the absolute hell out of Narcos and Yakuzas. And I'll be honest, my first run felt messy. I wasn't really sure what was happening and if the combat had enough depth. I was wondering if it was just going to be a goofy indie game that I'd play for an hour and never touch again. But I'm really glad I kept playing, because Mexican Ninja does open up the more you play, and it gets really fun. So let's talk about why. And thank you to developers Mad Bricks for the free review copy. Mexican Ninja is a roguelike beat 'em up at its core. You've got your light attack, heavy attack, jump, dash, parry, passive abilities, and 2 jutsus, and while that might not sound like an enormous amount of combat options, there is a bit going on. The heavy attack can also be used to parry. Enemies have different attack patterns. There are environmental hazards to navigate and deal with, and you really do have to be deliberate with your attacks. It's not really a game where you can just run into the group of enemies and mash the light attack button until everything dies. I mean, you can do that, but you're gonna have a rough time. The game rewards positioning, timing, knowing when to attack, and knowing when to get the hell out of the way. And that makes the combat surprisingly satisfying once you get comfortable with it. There is one problem though. Even if you get a bunch of different combos to unlock, I basically spammed the same 2 combos for the entire game. Not because the others are bad combos, but because these 2 were just better at controlling crowds. And when you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies like you are in beat-em-ups, crowd control is king. So while there's a lot of variety in the combat system, I don't think the game really gives you a reason to actually use all of it. But the foundation is still really solid, and that's mainly because skill matters. You have to learn the enemies, understand your abilities, and figure out how to deal with different situations. And that's even more important once you start messing with the game's build variety, because this isn't just a beat 'em up with random upgrades slapped onto it. There's genuinely fun build varieties that you can create. There's some that are around fire damage, critical strikes, stuns, counterattacks, black holes, invulnerability, debuffs, plenty of other ridiculous combinations. There's also a combo meter that interacts with some of your passive effects, which can make your build even stronger, and sometimes even make it a little more complicated. And then you have skins, and you're probably just thinking cosmetics, but these skins provide gameplay benefits, which means equipping a new skin completely changes how you're gonna approach your next run. For example, there's a God of War parody skin that increases your fire jutsu damage and can burn enemies when you get hit. So you'd imagine you're going for all of the fire stuff in that run. And one of the builds that I had the most fun with involved being an invulnerable tornado combined with a spinning black hole that makes me invulnerable for 2 seconds. But this still had caveats. So no, I never became some completely unstoppable god that could delete the entire screen in half a second, but there were definitely moments where I felt really darn powerful, and that's exactly what I want from a roguelike. This brings me to something that is the game's biggest strength. Every run gives you something. When you die, you don't just go, well, that was 20 minutes wasted. You're constantly unlocking new things. You can spend your money on permanent upgrades like more damage, more health, lower cooldown, stronger healing, new combos, and bonuses for your combo meter. And there's side quests. I actually really like how these are handled. They're not just random objectives that feel like the developers threw them in because of a checkbox. You naturally continue these throughout your runs. You're progressing the story, completing these objectives, unlocking these new skins and abilities, and gradually discovering more of what the game has to offer. So even when you lose, you still feel like you're accomplishing something. And that creates the exact kind of loop that can be dangerous. The addictive loop where you're suddenly looking at the clock, wondering where the last hour went. And surprisingly, Mexican Ninja's difficulty is pretty fair. The game does get harder as you progress, and eventually you'll even start seeing stronger enemies showing up in areas that used to be relatively easy. The bosses are generally challenging without being overly ridiculous, and the more you play, the easier those bosses become because you're actually learning their patterns and just getting better at the combat. There are definitely some cheap shots here and there though, because some of the attacks feel more like gotcha moments than the actual test of skill, but for most of the game, the difficulty feels good. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, because Mexican Ninja is just ridiculous and absurd. It's Mexican culture mixed with Japanese culture, mixed with anime, mixed with gangster stereotypes, mixed with whatever else developers felt like throwing into the blender. There are some genuinely clever jokes and wordplays throughout game, and just get a look at Guillermo Totoro. I will say some of the humor is going to be much harder to appreciate if you don't understand Spanish or Japanese. You may be surprised to learn that I know a little bit of both, and there were definitely jokes and wordplays that I could appreciate because of that. If you're completely unfamiliar with either language, you may miss some of these clever dialogues and story elements, but even without understanding every reference, the overall presentation has so much personality that it's hard not to have fun with. Now, Mexican Ninja isn't perfect, and the biggest problem I had with the game is actually the thing you spend the most time doing, which is walking across the levels. The individual areas are pretty unique and the environments do have changes, but the actual traversal between these encounters is what gets old real fast. You'll start seeing the same kinds of corridor battles that constrict you pretty early. We're talking about run 4 or run 5 before you start thinking like, okay, I wish it was a little more open-ended. Thankfully, there are some subtle story changes between runs, and I really like that the bosses actually have different dialogue instead of just repeating the same exact line every time you run into them. So there's still enough freshness to keep you going. This also isn't really a Debbie Downer, but you also face each boss in chronological order every single run, which isn't bad because this is how the game wants to be set up, but I am in my roguelike career as a gamer where I just want a more randomized mode of fighting random bosses here and there, so the fact that you have to fight the same ones over and over and over and over also can get old. But the bosses do have personalities. There's a panda boss that's really enjoyable, and I can't really believe I'm saying this, but I actually enjoy the stripper boss because the mechanics are just actually better than the other bosses. But I don't really want to be hit by YouTube, so I can't really show a lot of that. Just know this is rated M for mature. Most runs take somewhere around 15 to 25 minutes, and I'd say you're looking at roughly 6 to 9 hours of content, depending on how much you want to explore and replay. It's a compact, ridiculous, chaotic beat 'em up that gives you enough time to experiment with its systems without completely overstaying its welcome. And that's why I'm really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe, and check out this video where I finally found the perfect single player auto battler. I'll see you in the next one.